Have you ever wondered why walking away from a man, calmly, silently, without bitterness, leaves him more obsessed than any message you could have sent? Why your stillness suddenly becomes the loudest thing in his world? Most men live unaware of their deeper emotional wounds. They love on autopilot. They crave control, not connection. And yet, when a woman stops feeding their ego, when she reclaims her energy, when she simply lets go, that's when everything shifts. In the quiet of your absence, he'll finally hear the truth. He'll feel the depth of his own neglect. Jung said that a man's deepest fear is not being alone. His deepest fear is the pain of his own shadow. When you walk away, you awaken something in him that no one else has touched. The painful realization of who he could have been if he had met you fully. So if you've ever loved someone who couldn't love you back, this video is your permission to let go. Power with peace and with a truth that echoes louder than words. You've probably been told that the way to keep a man is to please him, to be agreeable, to soften your edges. But what if I told you the real key to unlocking a man's obsession has nothing to do with being nice or perfect, and everything to do with understanding his ego? There's a kind of magic that happens when a woman stops seeking validation. When she stops shrinking herself to fit into a man's perception. When she steps back not to punish, but to reclaim. That right there is when everything shifts. Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, believed that the ego is not who we really are, but a mask of fragile identity that tries to protect us from our deeper fears. And when that ego is threatened, even slightly, the unconscious comes alive. This is where obsession is born, not from love, not from kindness, but from disruption. When you disturb a man, ego, especially the ego of a man who's used to being in control, you awaken something ancient inside him. Not necessarily anger, not hatred, but a deep need to resolve the imbalance, to figure you out, to win you back. That's why when you pull away, when you become less available, when you withhold your attention, he starts to panic. He doesn't know how to deal with the fact that he can't predict your emotions, that he can't manipulate your feelings, that he can't fix the situation because he doesn't understand it. And that's when the obsession deepens. Let's go deeper. The male ego, especially in emotionally immature men, is structured around the illusion of control. When he believes he's the one deciding the pace, when he thinks he holds the emotional leverage, he feels safe. But the moment you pull back your energy, the moment you stop over-explaining, stop proving, stop trying, something inside him shifts. Jung would say this is the collapse of the ego's illusion, because up until now, he believed you were emotionally dependent. He believed your desire made him powerful. But now you've shown him that his power was never real. It was borrowed from your attention, and without it, he feels empty. Now, don't confuse this with manipulation. What we're talking about here is energetic detachment, not games, not passive aggression, but true feminine sovereignty. The kind that doesn't need to say anything, because your silence speaks louder than words. When you walk away from a man who expects you to stay, when you withhold the validation he thought he was entitled to, when you no longer chase the connection he's neglecting, you don't hurt him physically, you hurt his ego. And that's the only part of him that ever needed to be hurt in the first place. Because here's the twist Carl Jung understood so clearly. The ego must be cracked for the soul to awaken. Let that sink in. You're not trying to make him suffer, trying to awaken him to a reality he's been avoiding. A reality where your worth is not dependent on his attention. A reality where your love is a gift, not a currency. A reality where he realizes that your presence is not guaranteed. This, right here, is what begins the obsession. Because now, if you're not predictable, you're not available on demand. You're not filling the role he assumed you would play. You've stepped into your feminine power, the mystery, the depth, the unshakable calm that makes him feel like he's chasing something he cannot fully grasp. And nothing haunts a man more than a woman who has become emotionally unavailable after being emotionally open. Not because she's cold, but because she's done trying. Jung believed that when we become conscious of our own patterns, we step out of the loop of repetition. That's what you've done. You've stopped feeding his ego, and in doing so, you've stopped feeding the system that made you feel small. Now, you're not punishing him. You're protecting yourself. You're preserving your energy. And he feels it deeply. At first, he might pretend it doesn't matter. He might act aloof, even mock your distance. But inside, he's unraveling. Because ego doesn't handle rejection well. Ego doesn't know how to process silence. Ego wants answers, control, dominance. When you've taken all of that away without yelling, without fighting, without begging, just by being gone. Now let's be clear. You are not here to babysit his growth. You're not a tool for his transformation. But if you've ever wanted to understand why pulling away can have more impact than pulling closer, this is why. When you stop giving him what his ego feeds on, your need for him, you create a vacuum. And the male psyche, just like nature, hates a vacuum. So he starts to obsess, not over you necessarily, but over the feeling you gave him and then took away. That feeling of being wanted, being seen, of being significant. And now, he's questioning everything. Why did she stop calling? Why did she stop explaining? Why did she go quiet when I thought she'd break? What happened? That's when the obsession begins. Not because you hurt him, but because you disarmed his illusion. This is the essence of Carl Jung's view on transformation. It's not through comfort. It's through confrontation with reality, with truth, with the inner shadow. You have become the trigger, not because you're toxic, but because you no longer participate in your own neglect. And that, dear soul, is your power. Because now he's not thinking about your body. He's not even thinking about the last thing you said. He's thinking about your silence, your peace, your detachment. And whether or not he can ever earn that connection back again. Not through force, but through growth. Because you didn't just withdraw your affection, showed him what happens when a woman who knows her worth no longer waits for a man to see it. And that truth is unforgettable. There's a type of woman who unintentionally destroys a man's ego, not in a loud, rebellious way, but in that quiet, unshakable energy that says, I've seen your absence and I'm still whole without you, that shatters a man's ego. Because here's what most people don't understand. Men don't fall for perfection. They fall for the feeling a woman gives them. Especially when that feeling comes with mystery, contrast, and emotional gravity. And the moment you step back, the moment you remove your light from his world, he feels the contrast. You don't have to say a word. Your absence becomes a mirror. Carl Jung called this the mirror of the shadow. When a person's ego is confronted with something or someone that reflects their own unresolved inner world, a process begins, a psychological projection. The man who once ignored you, belittled your emotional needs, or took you for granted, starts seeing you everywhere. Not because of magic, but because of psychological imprinting. Let me explain. When you give and give, his ego becomes bloated. He starts to believe your affection is a given, that your energy is something he deserves. But when you finally stop, when the supply ends, his subconscious starts seeking you like a drug withdrawal. Not because of who you are physically, but because you represented something far deeper. You were the mirror to his emotional inadequacy. You showed up, you gave, you opened. And then, when his ego couldn't handle the intimacy, you stopped. This isn't just rejection, it's exposure. Because when a man's ego is built on control, attention, or superficial validation, the one thing he cannot stand is not being seen anymore. And now that you're gone, you're seen everywhere. That's the paradox. He didn't appreciate you when you were there, but now that you're gone, your absence is louder than your presence ever was. That's not just emotion. That's ego death. Jung taught that every individual, especially those unaware of their deeper drives, will be haunted by what they reject. And a man who once rejected your presence now becomes haunted by your absence. He replays your words. He questions his decisions. He stalks your silence with thoughts like, did I underestimate her? Was she more important than I thought? Why can't I stop thinking about her? And here's the answer. You became the unresolved story in his mind, the emotional cliffhanger, the what if, the path not taken. Why? Because the ego thrives on certainty. It needs closure, dominance, control. But you left him with none of that. You left with mystery, with dignity, with your soul intact. And that is unforgettable. Here's the thing most women do and realize. Men become obsessed with what they co-ent define. When you're overly available, constantly explaining yourself, constantly reacting to his emotional shifts, he puts you in a box. But when you stop, when your energy becomes sacred, when your emotions are no longer up for negotiation, So when your silence is your boundary, you become the woman he can't decode. And that triggers obsession, because now he's not just missing you, like he's trying to solve you. Carl Jung believed that obsession is often a symptom of projected desire. When the psyche latches onto someone who represents an internal void, that void could be intimacy, safety, mystery, purpose. In this case, you became the symbol of everything he doesn't yet understand within himself. Because the truth is, it was never about you chasing him. That dynamic was always meant to flip. The woman who knows her value doesn't seek, she attracts. And when you stopped chasing, stopped explaining, stopped emotionally compensating for his lack of clarity, you flipped the script. You triggered what Jung would call an activation of the shadow. That's the part of himself he refuses to deal with, the emotional immaturity, the fear of intimacy, the unhealed trauma from women before you. And now, you've pulled away. Not to punish, but because you've evolved. And he's stuck. He's stuck with the echo of your voice in his mind, with the imprint of your emotional presence on his soul, and with the realization that what he once took for granted might never come back. And trust me, that realization hurts more than rejection. It's not just that he misses you. It's that he now has to redefine you. It's not as the woman who was always there, but as the woman who walked away with grace. And there is nothing more dangerous to a fragile male ego than a woman who walks away without looking back. Because in that act, you've shown him something he was never taught to accept. That your value exists independent of his recognition, that your love is a choice, not a guarantee, and that your silence isn't empty. It's sacred. There comes a moment when a man realizes you're no longer trying to be understood. And that moment, my friends, is devastating to his ego. You see, we live in a world where women are conditioned to explain, justify, and emotionally labor their way into being seen. To overextend, overexpress, overlove. But once you reclaim your energy, once you step into stillness, something primal happens. He starts chasing what he can no longer control. And that stillness, that quiet, rooted, magnetic calm that radiates from a woman who knows her value, it's more powerful than any seduction technique in the world. Carl Jung believed that power lies not in control, but in consciousness. When you become conscious of your energy, when you stop reacting, stop chasing, stop filling the space he abandoned, you become unshakable. And that drives his ego insane, because now you're no longer playing the role he expected. You're no longer the anxious responder, the apologetic empath, the emotional caregiver. You've become the woman who waits for nothing. The woman who's already full. The woman who, without anger or revenge, simply withdrew her access. Let me tell you something most won't admit. A man can't truly obsess over a woman until she makes him feel powerless. Not in a cruel way, but in a way that forces him to confront his own inadequacy. You have done that. Not by screaming, not by sulking, but by being still. Stillness is misunderstood. People think it's passive. But stillness is an active form of dominance. It's the refusal to engage in chaos. It's the refusal to validate immaturity. The refusal to chase what isn't ready for you. And when a man sees that, when he realizes you are not reactive, not needy, not emotionally volatile, but composed, radiant, mysterious, he begins to spiral. Because here's what no one told him. You are no longer available for the old game. Carl Jung described the feminine as both chaos and order, the divine paradox. A woman in her power doesn't manipulate. She moves energy. She shifts the dynamic without speaking. And you have done exactly that. Let's be clear. Your stillness isn't about punishing him. It's about choosing yourself over proving yourself. That's a different frequency entirely. You're not playing hard to get. You've become hard to forget. Because stillness doesn't just create space. It creates reflection. He now has nothing to push against. No reaction to control. No explanation to twist. No emotional plea to validate his narrative. It's just your absence. And that silence is where obsession begins to fester. He'll start remembering the little things. The way your voice softened when you were truly present. The way your eyes held a sadness you never voiced. The way you stayed patient far longer than you should have. And now he realizes he didn't just lose a woman. He lost a sanctuary. And you didn't slam the door. You left it open and walked away. Do you know how that messes with a man's ego? It leaves him hoping you'll text, hoping you'll break, hoping you'll slip back into the emotional patterns that made him feel powerful. But instead, you remain still. That's when he starts reaching out.
Not always.
With words. Sometimes with energy. Social media views. Random stories, a like on an old post, a passive-aggressive quote on his story, and because he's still trying to get a response. Any response? Still hoping to break your stillness? But Jung warned us. Once the feminine detaches energetically, the masculine must choose, evolve, or be left behind. This is where the obsession becomes internalized. It's no longer about you. It's about what he lost in himself when you left. You see, the feminine when, embodied with truth, becomes a mirror to the masculine soul. You didn't just love him. You awakened parts of him that he never knew existed. And now that you're gone, he feels the void. But unlike before, when your energy filled that space with softness, availability, and presence, now there's just silence. And in that silence, he's left alone with his ego. No distractions, no drama, no validation, just himself. And for many men, that is the most terrifying place to be. Because now the thoughts begin. What if she was the one? What if I was too proud? What if I mistook her peace for indifference? And that spiral is obsession. Not over your body, but over your essence. Because here, the Jungian truth, a man will never become obsessed with a woman who worships him. He becomes obsessed with the woman who forces him to confront who he truly is. And you, by no longer trying to change him, have become that woman. That's emotional mastery. That is the secret sauce. That is the soul work most people avoid. You didn't chase. You didn't fix. You didn't fight. You walked away in stillness. And in doing so, you became his mirror. One he can't escape. One he can't decode. One he can't silence. So what does he do? He obsesses. He imagines conversations you're not having. He rewrites history. Replays the last time he saw you. The way you didn't beg. The way you smiled gently before leaving. And it haunts him. Because he now realizes something he never wanted to admit. He could never reach your level. Not because he was unworthy. But because he wasn't ready. And you didn't wait. You elevated. Letting go is misunderstood. We think it means defeat. It's giving up. Surrendering the dream. But in truth, letting go is a radical act of self-respect. It is an unspoken declaration. I will no longer betray my own soul to be loved by someone who deigned to see me. And this is where your power multiplies. Carl Jung taught that transformation only happens when the unconscious becomes conscious. That's not just philosophy. It's real, visceral, emotional alchemy. When you let go of a man who wasn't meeting you, you didn't just lose him, you shattered the illusion that you had to perform to be loved. And whether he knows it or not, that moment changed him too, because now he can't access you. And humans crave most what they can no longer possess. But this isn't just psychology's energy. Feminine energy, when aligned, becomes magnetic. Not because it chases, but because it invites. Not because it demands, but because it attracts. You see, most men operate from the masculine. Structure, pursuit, logic. They're used to conquering. They're taught that power comes from possession. But when they meet a woman who cannot be possessed, only experienced, it throws them off balance. Because now the game has changed. You're not the woman who needs. You are the woman who knows. Knows who she is. Knows what she's worth. Knows that the universe does not require her to beg for what is aligned. And suddenly, that man who ignored your softness, who dismissed your emotional presence, now finds himself craving your energy. Not because he understands it, but because he's addicted to the absence of it. This is the part no one talks about. Men don't obsess over women who scream, plead, or convince. They obsess over the woman who once held space for them and then walked away when they couldn't step into it. Why? Because she triggers their becoming. She is the test, the initiator, the spark that burns down their comfort zone. And if they're not ready, they'll call her too much, too deep, too intense. But that's not the truth. The truth is, she was their mirror, and they weren't ready to see themselves. But now he's reflecting. Now he finds himself wondering why no one else feels quite like you. Why every new woman feels like a watered-down version of the emotional connection you offered freely. Until you didn't. You didn't close your heart. You just closed access. Didn't become cold. You became sacred. And nothing disrupts a man's ego more than a woman who stops making herself available. Because in his mind, he always believed he could come back. Thought the door would always be cracked open. But when he returned and found nothing but your silence, no anger, no spite, just stillness, shook him. Why? Because he thought he was in control. But now he realizes that you were always the one with the power. He just never noticed while you were pouring into him. Jung believed that obsession arises when the unconscious self recognizes something essential in the other but can integrate it. That's exactly what's happening here. You represent something he hasn't yet mastered within himself. Wholeness, emotional depth, spiritual presence. And now, the very thing he took for granted has become the thing he craves the most. But obsession is not always expressed in words. Sometimes it shows up as silence, regret, watching your stories, clicking your old photos, reading your last message over and over again. That's the mind's way of trying to reconnect to the energy it lost. The irony, you didn't disappear. You didn't ghost. You just refused to keep giving to someone who wasn't ready to receive. Is that kind of woman? She doesn't just haunt a man. She transforms him. If he's conscious, this will wake him up. He will feel the sting not of rejection, but of misalignment, of missed opportunity, of the divine feminine force that stood before him and left without punishing him, because you knew your love isn't a weapon, it's a blessing. And if it's not honored, it must be withdrawn, not with bitterness, but with grace. That's where true obsession is born. Not in chaos, but in clarity. He's not obsessing over drama. He's obsessing over your emotional evolution, the way you no longer flinch when his name is mentioned, the way your glow returned when he wasn't around, the way your voice softened, not for him but for yourself, because now you're loving from overflown, not emptiness. Now you're loving from alignment, not fear. And that shift, that spiritual glow up, it's undeniable. He can feel it even if he never says a word. And that's what drives him mad. Because men are used to being chased, to being forgiven, to being put on pedestals they didn't earn. But now he has to face the truth. He lost a woman who was never trying to hurt him. She was trying to love him, and she realized he wasn't ready for real love.
Ow.
And now he's obsessed, not with ownership, but with the ghost of a woman who gave him a glimpse of the divine and then let him go. Why doesn't he call me? Why hasn't he moved on? Why is he still obsessed? Well, because you awakened something inside of him. But obsessing over you is like trying to grab smoke. He reaches out, but all he gets is air, and that drives him mad. Let's rewind. Obsession is just the beginning. It might start with curiosity, then grow into longing. Before he knows it, he's walking through his days haunted by something he can't name. Not your body, not your words, but your presence, or more precisely, the absence of it. And now, he's stuck in a loop. Because a man who is not yet awake will see your withdrawal as betrayal. But a man on the path of consciousness, he'll feel something deeper. He'll feel the invitation. An invitation to grow. An invitation to meet you on the level of soul, not ego. Carl Jung spoke often of the individuation process, a psychological transformation where one stops living for the ego and begins living from the self. The true essence. But here's the truth. No man begins this journey unless he's been shaken. And you were the earthquake, not the destruction, the disruption. He was comfortable in his patterns, used to half-effort, used to emotional laziness, used to women bending for his wounds until you didn't. You didn't yell, didn't explain for the 100th time. You didn't try to save him, you just let go. In that moment, that sacred quiet ending, it planted a seed in his unconscious. He may fight it, he may distract himself. He may run to others who require less of him. But the seed is there, the image of you, not begging, not waiting, just gone. And now, the obsession becomes spiritual, because now that you've walked away, he sees the lie of his ego more clearly than ever, because the ego said, she'll wait, she'll come back, she can't live without me. But the soul now whispers something different. You were loved deeply and you failed to receive it. That realization, it either breaks a man or it builds him. Some men collapse under the weight of that truth. They distract themselves, dive deeper into their wounds. They numb, avoid, retreat. And that obsession, it turns toxic, becomes control, jealousy, entitlement, a desperate attempt to reclaim what they refuse to cherish. But others awaken, slowly, painfully, but surely. Because once you've felt the love of a conscious woman, you can't unfeel it. It lingers in every room, in every touch, in every connection that lacks her depth. You've set the standard now. It's not just for how he wants to be loved, but for the man he now realizes he wants to become. And no, that doesn't mean you need to take him back. Your job was never to finish the work for him. Your job was to start it. That's what the feminine does. She awakens, she births, she ignites, and then she lets go. Because her worth is not attached to the outcome. Her worth is anchored in her being. This is the soul of feminine energy. It does not chase, does not beg. It does not wait for those who cannot rise. It simply shines. In doing so, exposes who is ready and who is not. Carl Jung believed that women carry an archetypal role in the psyche of man. What he called the anima. She represents his soul, his emotional compass, his unconscious longing. You were his anima, not the fantasy version, the real one. The one who loved with her eyes open, who saw his pain but refused to drown in it, who offered connection but not at the cost of self-abandonment. Now that you're gone, he's left with a choice. Collapse deeper into the ego, or rise into his soul. That's what your absence teaches him. That real love does not wait forever. That emotional safety is not a given. That depth has a price, and if he's not willing to pay it with his presence, he loses access. But what about you? Happens now. You rise. Not because he's obsessed, not because he's hurting, because you finally chose yourself completely. And in doing so, you've shifted the story. You're no longer the woman who stays too long. You're the woman who loved fully and walked away when it was no longer sacred. That is the most powerful energy on earth. Because the woman who can walk away with love in her heart, but peace in her soul, becomes untouchable, unforgettable, and yes, unmatched. You don't need to wonder if he's thinking about you. He is. Every single day. And not just thinking, it's obsessing. Because he knows. He lost the kind of woman who doesn't come around twice. Not because she's rare, but because she won't settle for half love again. So what happens when you hurt a man's ego? Not with cruelty, but with quiet detachment. He begins to unravel. Not because you caused him pain, but because you showed him what it feels like to lose a woman who refuses to stay small for love. You didn't play games. You didn't punish him. You simply stopped showing up where your soul was starving. And in doing so, you taught him the most painful and powerful lesson of all. That the feminine does not beg. She remembers her worth. She rises. And she leaves the door open for those who are ready to rise with her. Carl Jung would remind you, this was never about him. This was about you stepping into the version of yourself that no longer abandons her own heart for someone else's comfort. So wherever he is now, scrolling, thinking, obsessing, you can let him go. Not with bitterness, but with the quiet knowing that you didn't lose him. Lost access to the woman who was ready to love him into transformation. And you're just getting started.